Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
Hello everyone, today I'm joined by Ben and Erik from the podcast for a New American Century, where they're busy doing a deep geopolitical dive into all things 9/11. I would recommend this as one of the best ongoing efforts to uncover the truth of that day. As we're approaching the quarter-way mark of this American century, I invited them on to discuss how they think this modern incarnation of imperialism is going. I begin by asking what took them down this particular rabbit hole, and here's Erik starting us off with his answer.
Well, Ben and I found ourselves meeting on the internet, as Ben said we all do nowadays, and we were in a mutual chat room kind of discussing with other people parapolitical events. We were both, I think at the time, I guess for myself, I was relatively new to discussing and starting to read about more parapolitical events, starting out with your big hits, JFK and 9/11, I guess, really. And I think we were just very interested in reading more about the intelligence failures that happened before 9/11. Ben found Kevin Fenton's book, Disconnecting the Dots, and he started reading that and posting about that, and I started getting really interested in that as well. And before you know it, I had, a stack of books in my house that made my wife start asking weird questions. And we were just talking about a way to kind of organize that information and start sharing that information. And Ben mentioned that he had this idea that he wanted to do a podcast just to get the information out. And at that point, I think Ben probably knew a lot more about the specifics than I did. And the original pitch of the show would be, I sort of just sit there and ask Ben questions in a way to prompt out Ben sharing information that he wanted to share. And
I tried to do the solo podcast thing at first, and that there were maybe 2 early attempts that just went right into the delete because I full respect to people like Adam that can do that kind of stuff, Adam Fitzgerald, that can do that kind of stuff. For me, it is absolutely impossible and just makes me feel like I am a crazy person. It's actually really funny, Richard, that we're talking because it was Darkened Hour that was basically the direct inspiration for us starting this show. I basically found that one day, burned through the back catalog within, I don't know, a week, and became so frustrated that there was nothing else that was covering that kind of content that, I'm a deeply stubborn person, and I was like, okay, fine, I'll just make my own show. We'll just do it that way. And Erik started off as being the person that I could just bounce things off of and not feel like a lunatic. And is just so good at research that it quickly became a level playing field, and we've been going ever since.
Can I ask you, was there a red pilling moment for either of you? Because Kevin Fenton and Disconnecting the Dots, that's a pretty good place to start, but it's a difficult place to start. Actually, that's a detailed book. Yeah. I think I put it down.
We spent almost a year trying to get through it.
I put it down on my first attempt and didn't pick it up again for probably a number of years until doing the series of Adam. But what I have this theory which I annoy Adam with, because Adam hates the fantastical conspiracy theories, particularly no plane hits the Pentagon. That really winds him. I've got a bunch of fake profiles on Facebook where I post that stuff to him just to wind him up. Now he knows. Now it's out of you.
He's got 5 different versions of you blocked. You in 5 different realities blocked.
So, but I have this thing that there's kind of a conveyor belt with 9/11 stuff. That a lot of people doing really interesting stuff started out in a kind of, it's something quite fringe catches their eye at some point. And that could be a kind of crazy JFK theory. It could be the towers are brought down by laser beams, or the no plane at the Pentagon thing, or whatever. But there's often a fringe thing. So did either of you have that where there was something fringe that caught your eye, or were you entering into this at a reasonably sort of centrist, sensible place to be engaging?
No, I do. Do you want to go? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, Ben. By all means.
No, I was going to ask you to go first.
Okay. No, I'm not too proud to admit that I certainly started at a more fringe place, in particular 9/11. I think the thing that caught my interest first, that really piqued me, was the story about how the passport was found outside of World Trade Center 1. And
Classic.
yeah. And then when I learned that apparently there had been some collaboration between, I kind of forget now because it's been so long since I've read anything about it. I think it was between Carlyle and a Japanese mining company that had a patent on nanothermite technology for the purposes of mining, and a patent that had been taken out in, I believe, 1996 and then expired in like 2012 or 11 or something like that. I think when I heard about that, I decided that I wanted to read more about 9/11.
For me, it's actually really funny. I was 13 when 9/11 happened. I'm in early 30s now. And growing up as like a teen, I was actually a big time debunker. I loved like History Channel debunk, like conspiracy theory kind of stuff. Those kind of like recreation shows that would always have like the really smug popular science guys on talking about like why this, that, and the other thing, like all must just be conspiracy nonsense. And I always had kind of an interest in that. Like I would always love this, for your Zoomer listeners, was pre-on-demand days when you just kind of had to settle for what was on television. And I always like really liked the conspiracy stuff while never taking it seriously. I have a very vivid memory of going to Ground Zero 2003, 2004. And there were some of the like controlled demolition people like handing out leaflets like around like the site, and just like having this feeling of just actually really disgust and like revulsion at like, and these people are not making a scene or anything. Like they weren't saying anything, just handing out like pamphlets about, like Eric said, microthermite and stuff like that. So I was not really in the pocket for that kind of stuff growing up necessarily, but like what really actually got me on board originally, and we've done a whole episode about this, Eric and I, were all the financial crimes, the insider trading that, was acknowledged, but was never really included in like the 9/11 Commission or anything like that, because there were no direct ties at the time to Al-Qaeda. And that's like the first sort of conspiracy thing that I ever came across that there was not, the popular science debunk for. And, once you kind of like see that one of those things is true, it's like, well, what other threads can we pull here? And then you start kind of going through a lot of this conspiracy stuff, wanting to sort of see, that it's all kind of just jokey and whatever. And then like, well, that inconsistency seems weird, and that one seems weird. And I think it was 2019, podcast TrueAnon did like their, big blowout series about 9/11 stuff. And I don't support everything that's in that personally, but yeah, just kind of getting that sort of the inconsistencies that kind of like open your eyes to sort of the more broad, fringe narrative, I suppose.
Right. Yeah, that's another way I hear now that I think about it, that people start off debunking as kind of a mental exercise, or because they think it's a moral thing to do. And then they're going along with that. And there's plenty you can debunk about 9/11 and all this deep political stuff. But then they hit something, they're being honest.
Oh, definitely.
They really can't debunk. So it does seem to have merit in it. It suddenly seems like the debunkers around them maybe aren't playing with the fairest hand here, and they're caught in their own kind of illusions. And so that's how James Corbett got started. Now I think about it. He was having fun debunking nonsense 9/11 videos one weekend, when Google videos was just a thing, and then until the point he couldn't debunk them anymore, and then he became the Corbett Report. So yeah, that's it. It's
then you guys start asking the questions. Yeah. You debunk yourself into a corner basically at that point.
yeah I mean, I started off with the fringes as fringe. I read a David Icke book just before 9/11, so I'm reading about the shape-shifting reptiles.
Hell yeah.
And I thought it was just this is an interesting mental exercise, like the can you construct a completely different vision of the world and history and everything, and does it stand up, or does it just collapse instantly? I'm assuming it does. I'm assuming I won't get like a quarter of the way through the book before this is all gone, and I'm having to say, okay, that was ridiculous. But then
we want to do for Halloween this year the S.K. Bain
the most dangerous book in the world
book. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And how it was all satanic mass ritual, and for the same reason where a lot of that stuff is fun, because you want to see what other worldview you can come up with out of the same objective events. That kind of stuff for me is much more amusing than it is serious, I would say. What do you think?
Yeah, I would definitely agree, because I think Richard, I probably started along the lines that you did a little bit more, coming at it from, while this is insane, Can I keep reading until the argument completely falls apart? That definitely just sort of tickled my brain. I guess I'm a bit more of a contradictory person. I love playing devil's advocate. So when I see a lot of like debunking videos, I'm like, yeah, right. Like certainly you can debunk the debunker, right?
Yep.
But yeah, doing the SK Bane for Halloween seems like a very fun idea, especially because I think it opens with the beams of the World Trade Center as pitchforks, meaning satanic ritual.
I'm not familiar with this. I'll just say, I think with the David Icke thing, I think it was the sensible stuff that drew me in and seemed actually like far more radical to me. So the suggestion the CIA traffics drugs, for example, like, get out of here. Come on. I've seen all sorts of TV shows. The CIA are always the good guys, right? They're out catching the drug.
Yeah.
And then you find out, and even things like we'd done about fluoride in the water supply and how there was a debate between people who wanted it, didn't want it. But never was it mentioned there was actually, reasonable body of evidence to suggest it was toxic. So David Icke brought up all these facts that you would find in lots of like more respectable places, if you like. So, but I think it definitely influenced the way I saw it on the day. That I saw, because of the whole occult angle in Icke's work, I saw, oh, is this some kind of magical ritual taking place? I don't know what I'm looking at anymore. And yeah, that was. But what's the SK? I'm sorry to be. I don't know what is the SK Bane ritual idea that you're talking about?
Oh,
Ben, do you want to take that?
Have you read more of it than I have at this point? I mean, the general idea is that 9/11 was basically staged by global elites as a satanic mass ritual, and that by studying like numerology and astrology and like all these kind of more esoteric data points, you can uncover this conspiracy. And then doesn't the back half of the book then try to like predict that there will be like a nuclear terrorist attack like in Arizona, like Christmas
he did.
Yeah.
2012, I think. He did predict like 9/11 2.0 would happen. And I think it's 2012. I haven't read all of the book. I've only read little bits of it here and there. But obviously that did not come true. And then I think he wrote even an addendum to it explaining why that wasn't true. In very good, almost...
Which respect, I mean...
I know, yeah. In very good, almost cult-like fashion, I believe he just boils it down to, no, we got the date wrong. It'll happen here,
It's a lot of that Dave McGowan style, like numerology. Hitler's birthday always seems to come up. People love talking about
They do. That's 20th of April or something, isn't it? That's the big day.
Yeah.
It is 20th of April.
Yeah, I can't not find that stuff a little bit fascinating. Like you say, for a Halloween episode kind of thing. I've been to talk to people there's a conspiracy theorist, he wouldn't accept that term, but Ian R. Crane in the UK, who would switch between geopolitical analysis 1 minute, and then the next slide would come up, and if we look at the numerology of this event, it's like, what? And there is that.
You got to cover all your bases. I mean, in case like a memo comes up later showing that the intelligence part is wrong, if you got Satan in your back pocket.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. You can always fall back on Aleister Crowley if you're in a corner.
For me, I found Mike Rupert's work then, and that book came out in about 2003 or something, from Crossing the Rubicon. And like a 600-page book. And at that point, I was quite young. And I thought, wow, 600-page book. I've never seen a 600-page book other than the Bible. I mean, like, if I read this, I'm going to be a real expert on 9/11. Well, not quite that simple. But
right.
That was an impressive work at the time. And I don't remember so many people back then talking about the controlled demolitions of the buildings. Probably because you don't have Google video or YouTube or anything, so you can talk about it, but you can't see Building 7. It was probably years after the event I actually saw Building 7 collapse. So at that time, that wasn't the center stage that it later became. So, and I recall Mike actually suggesting not to go down too technical an avenue, because he saw how expert evidence just would cancel itself out in court, where you'd have one expert say one thing, and so
it always does. I mean, that's the reason why we have such a strict no Twin Towers policy, no controlled demolition policy on the show, is because, like, I'm not going to speak for Eric, but I'm incredibly stupid, and especially when you get into engineering, science, physics, anything like that. Like, yeah, the expert evidence just cancels itself out. I'm not going to be convinced either way, because like I just am not smart enough to understand any of that.
Yeah,
we're very big on sticking with what we know, which is mostly the geopolitical history of the movies.
Yeah, exactly. I would agree with that 100%. I can't say one way or another. I got a B- in physics in high school, and that's about as far as my engineering career could have ever hoped to go.
Yeah, I got a total fail, which I thought qualified me to interview David Chandler. So I gave it a go, and And what I tend to say about it,
you guys did a good job on that.
do you think so? Thank you.
Yeah,
well,
I thought that episode was fantastic.
I think Adam mentioned it's your most popular one,
almost
too,
certainly,
isn't it?
yeah. So my attitude was me going around saying, yeah, it was controlled demolition, man, building 7. I wouldn't take me seriously if I was stuck in an elevator with me saying that. What do I know about it? But what I can say is, and you might find this, or you might have already found it, if you're interviewing people, you get to know who bullshitters are, right? Because there's people who will talk very, very loudly on the internet about all the things they can prove about everything. And then if you ask them to debate or send some difficult questions their way, then suddenly they disappear. And they have all sorts of reasons to disappear. And this is pretty consistent. And what I found with David was whatever I sent him, he was completely happy to answer it. He was completely open to debating anyone. A lot of the people who would criticize him suddenly disappeared when that was put to them as an option. And that's what I can say. I can say that in contrast to a lot of other 9/11 theories, like the no planes or holographic planes or whatever, you have some very serious, heavyweight, intelligent people on the controlled demolition side. Now, I can't say more than that, but I think in a sense that's more powerful than me ranting and raving about how there were bombs on Pillar 47 or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. Support beam. Is it like, I think it's 47, like 51, whatever. Yeah, I think it's 47. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Like, we would, I think, speaking for Ben, we would love to have David Chandler on because he's someone who I think is so well informed, obviously very smart individual, maybe a little unable to check his own bias if I could just give any sort of criticism, but he is obviously intelligent, obviously has a lot to say, but I wouldn't have any way really to push back on him because I don't know,
Yeah. And I think what I tried to do in that interview was get him to talk about his background, because he's just the guy with the big beard who appears and talks about physics on the documentaries. That's all people know about it. But the fact that he was an anti-war activist in the 80s, and he was helping refugees out when Reagan was bombing Nicaragua, that I think that gives a kind of context to places other thoughts inside, which I quite enjoyed getting to understand that part of David.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would you say that your objective is in coming into the podcast? Is it in putting all this work into it, are you trying to understand 9/11 in a wider geopolitical context and understand where the world has gone from there in this apparently new American century? What's your aspiration with it?
Ben, you want to go first?
I think one of the motivating factors in both starting the show and especially when we get into the more hard history stuff, like these sorts of timelines that we put together. Like the thing about 9/11 and the whole extended 9/11 universe, the road to and from 9/11, I suppose, it's very dense. It's very difficult to follow. And while at the center of it is one of the most spectacular, media spectacles of, the 20th century so far, probably, a lot of it is very confusing. And at times it's very boring and difficult to follow. And there are a million different names and a million different acronyms and organizations. And, a lot of it is not easy to find. It's out there. You can find it if, you spend just a minimum amount of time reading books and, knowing where to look. But, an easy, digestible way to sort of synthesize and, follow this kind of information doesn't really exist. Like I mentioned earlier, that's what I liked so much about Adam's show, is that, things would be focused on these specific topics and you could get these sort of deep dives into these, these histories and who these people are and, what was motivating them. And wanting just to have that in a package that was easy to digest, I think was one of our big motivating factors in starting this.
Mm-hmm. For me personally, I learn best by explaining to somebody. That's how I found that I kind of synthesize information the best. So the show for me was really an opportunity, which is why I was so excited when Ben asked me to be a part of it, or, kind of pitched the idea to me. It was an opportunity to better understand the world that I live in. I live in Texas. I had very normie, I would probably call neoliberal politics, until I was probably, 26, 27, and starting to learn more and read more about the geopolitics, particularly surrounding 9/11, amongst other parapolitical events in American history and world history, and then talking about them or even just writing about them on twitter.com helped me better understand what I was reading and what I was starting to learn, and it helped me form my own opinions about the world that I live in and see every day.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get that, and it'd be the one big reason I'd recommend for anyone to consider doing a podcast or writing or anything is I notice my own understanding goes up so much, and it surprises me because I'll read something and I think I understand it, but then when you have to explain it, you just find all these gaps. It's like, hang on, how did that connect? And so that's a.
How does the saying go where it's like if you can't explain something to like a 4-year-old child and you don't really understand it, like being able to like put it in terms so simple that like even a child can like follow what you're trying to explain is like how you can really prove that you've mastered something. Right.
Yeah. Like, can you give a 15-second elevator pitch, you know?
I have a 6-year-old half sister. I've never had her listen to PNAC, so we'll see how that can bear out eventually. But I don't want to get Child Protective Services involved in the meantime.
You could probably record her listening to it and make a podcast out of that. Actually, I think people would be interested to.
She could be our guest for a 9/11 episode.
There we go.
The next generation.
Yeah, but the show really, being able to understand and explain what I'm thinking about anything, and being able to defend an opinion, because that's another thing is you can understand something and explain something, but then you might be talking about it to a friend who isn't steeped in deep politics or parapolitics or even history or whatever, who might just say, well, how do you know that? I've had that. I remember when I first started really reading about stuff like this, I told a friend, oh my God, the CIA killed JFK. I know it. And they just said, well, how do you know that? And I couldn't respond. This was several years ago, but I couldn't follow up. I realized that I had maybe listened to a few podcast episodes and read a few articles, and scrolled on Twitter, and I couldn't defend what I was saying at all. And so something about that interaction really drove me to want to have fully formed opinions and arguments and be able to back up whatever I was going to say with actual fact and sources and I guess actual solid material.
And I can't speak to Erik's like personal experience. Like I know his biography decently well at this point, but like I'm not sure on an exact timeline. But for myself, at least, Richard, I find that like an interesting pivot point, and I've talked to other friends of mine about this kind of topic, and they seem to have similar experiences. That for a lot of people in our kind of age demographic, late 20s, early 30s, the 2016 election, I think, kind of pushed a lot of people into sort of having this kind of renewed interest in the parapolitical and in, this kind of like, quote unquote secret history almost of both the United States and the rest of the world. I think that a lot of people up until that point, we were young when we had the kind of whole reckless horror of the Bush administration, but we had 8 years of Obama kind of bringing everyone back to brunch, as it were. And then, with both like the Hillary Trump choice that like a lot of people like really resented having to make. I know myself and Erik both did. And then, the just outright clown show of the 4 years of Trump that followed that, plus COVID, I think it quickly eroded a lot of trust that even like folks like us were willing to give the government at the time. We obviously had to process, stuff like the Iraq War and the rest of the criminality of the Bush administration, but, it at least still felt like the government, like, could be trusted in a certain light. And then, getting pushed more and more down these kinds of holes. And I was the same way. Like, JFK was something that I was always obsessed with as a little kid. And then growing up, like, I also was kind of getting back into that around 2016, 2017. And then, you just keep falling down these rabbit holes. And the way that all of this history works is that there's always another branch, another node, another crime done in a different country in a different decade that you can keep learning about.
I was actually completely credulous to the JFK thing when I was a kid. I'd see pop culture references to it, but I assumed, well, obviously that can't be true, right? Because the whole machinery of the US media would come grinding to a halt, and they would never be able to have another election again until this was resolved, if there was even a shred of evidence for this. So, oh, you sweet summer child that I was, yes. But I think with for me, 9/11 and probably my generation, you do see a lot of people kind of my age who, through 9/11 and then the egregious nature, the in-your-face nature of the Iraq War, where it was so obvious the justifications were flimsy, that caused the faith in the state to crack apart in a way that, growing up through the 90s, well, we had George Bush launch the first invasion of Iraq, but that seemed like some kind of humanitarian gesture to save this poor little country of Kuwait. And then there was a whole
Saddam gassed the Kurds.
Yeah, and there was the whole like.
Do you remember throwing the babies out of the incubators?
Exactly. And then the Yugoslav thing. See, again, humanitarian intervention. Okay, I can understand why they do these things.
Hey, someone had to bomb that Chinese embassy. I mean,
what a terrible coincidence. Yeah. So there was this like cracking of faith in the state for these, and it's interesting how like then the Trump era becomes another one of those points where you kind of, I don't know, like the Wizard of Oz, you see behind the curtain. You say, oh, right, yeah, it's not what you think it is. It's not what you think it is. So I was to put a spectrum down with like your 9/11 as a mass ritual to bring about the New World Order at one end of that spectrum. And at the other end, George Bush is telling exactly the truth, and it's exactly what he said at the other end of that spectrum. There's all these possibilities. Now, do you feel in your research you've narrowed it down to one particular strand of thought that 9/11 and geopolitics fits into, or do you think you're operating over a range of possibilities? Like maybe some people do plan for a new world order to come about, or maybe it kind of does more happen by accident, but the structures are such that they guarantee we constantly live in this warfare state that's constantly re-arising. Or what do you feel a narrowness there, or kind of pluralism as to the possibilities?
I think definitely a pluralism. And I think the more that I research and learn, the more I think that it's a pluralism. The more that I learn, the less I feel I know. I think when I was very naive and hadn't read a single thing, I had a very definitive idea of what I thought happened. And then the more I read, the more I realize that I've just broken down all of my preconceived notions about anything that could be possible. And there's definitely been stages in which I thought, oh, it's George Tenet. Look at what Dick Clark said. It's George Tenet. It's Richard Blee. It's Tom Wilshire. They did it. And then it's, oh, wait, no, actually, George Tenet was getting stonewalled by Condoleezza Rice. Oh, wait, no, George Tenet and Condoleezza Rice were getting stonewalled along with the FBI by Michael Hayden. Look at what Kurt Weldon had to say. Look at, you just keep on finding or peeling back layers, and there is no clear-cut answer. And I've had other people ask me this question, DM the show account on Twitter and ask me, okay, real talk, what happened?
What's the unified theory of 9/11?
What happened? And every time I just have to reluctantly say I'm only going to disappoint you, because I can only say that I don't know. I can't give a theory of what happened. I can tell you maybe a very large picture of what I think happened, and I think that if I had to boil it down, it was a lot of people acting in self-interest, a lot of people taking advantage of a moment, and but at the end of the day, I still do kind of believe that it was more or less something of a, I won't say necessity, but really an end goal of 60 plus years of American foreign policy post World War I, that brought us to 9/11. It was an eventuality, I suppose I could say.
Inevitability after a while. I agree with Eric. I don't have like a unified theory of 9/11. I think, like Eric, the more and more we do this, the less and less of the possibility of me ever having one kind of slips away. We explicitly started doing this show as a way to, I think more than anything, assign out blame, because I think in a story like this, blame definitely goes in degrees. I think we hold people to kind of like this legal standard of like, accessory to murder, basically, like, at least in the United States, for like us plebes, if you know that someone is going to murder someone and you do nothing to stop it, like there is like a degree of like responsibility. And obviously, we don't see any of this with the 9/11 story. You know, there are people in the CIA, there's people in the FBI, there's people in the NSA, there's people in the Bush administration, all of whom could have done something to stop it and chose not to. At the end of the day, I think that the plot itself was Al Qaeda. You know, I think that they were definitely enabled by, you know, other entities, be it, you know, people in the CIA or people in the Saudi government, Saudi intelligence, what have you. But I mean, we know that it was Al Qaeda. You know, we know because they had there's a clear through line you can draw from '93 World Trade Center bombing through Bojinka, through the Millennium plots, and the bombings in East Africa. Like, there's such a clear history line that if you're willing to follow it and actually learn all of this stuff, for me, that's one of the most certain things, is that, you know, there were these hijackers. They were, you know, working for Al Qaeda. They may have, you know, been working for other people too at the same time. We don't know yet. But like, there is that, you know, you can't just ignore that part of the history, because then you end up losing so much of it. But then at the same time, you know, if you can assign out that blame, if you can say, you know, the CIA knew about it and didn't do this, you know, Mossad knew about it and, you know, we're following it for so long and chose to do nothing on their side. Okay, well, clearly they didn't do it necessarily, but, you know, if your fingerprints are all over it, it's not a good look.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's the most solid ground to stand on. I remember hearing John Gold interviewing Paul Thompson of the Terror Timeline one time, and Paul Thompson made this point of, well, look, there might have been intention within the CIA, within the NSA, within the administration, but I can't prove that. But I can prove criminal negligence, and that will open the doors to all sorts of other things then. But you can have that solid ground.
Exactly. And yeah, exactly. And we've been spending most of the existence of the show doing the disconnecting the dots story. The CIA, you know, hiding information about Al-Hazmi and Al-Madar, two of the hijackers that were on the flight that went into the Pentagon. And, you know, they entered the United States in January of 2000. And for, you know, almost 2 years, they're operating in the United States. And at so many different opportunities, the FBI or other law enforcement have easy opportunities to roll these guys up. They're obviously Al Qaeda. They're not stupid necessarily, but they don't exactly have a strong handle on tradecraft and like how to not be, you know, they were living at a certain point in San Diego, like with their names in the phone book. Yeah. These guys were not exactly like super spies.
They were living with an FBI informant.
Well, with an FBI informant with their names. Al Qaeda's central hub from.
Yeah, which the NSA is
and that,
like
that number had appeared,
exactly.
The Yemen hub number had appeared in trials, I think in Egypt, and had actually been published in the Observer newspaper, I think in 1999, from the top of my head. And nobody in Al Qaeda realized that their number of their central hub was
being monitored
in the public domain, so obviously being monitored. And then it's Khalid al-Mihdhar, isn't he? He's calling about his wife who's pregnant back in Yemen. So Yemen, There is, I mean, that's a theme that runs through, to pick up on that. Like, I read some books on Irish terrorism, the IRA, for comparison, and looking at the kind of security details they have there. So, for example, if they suspect someone might be informing, they'll get military uniforms, set up a roadblock, stop them, and pretend to be like British soldiers, like the UDF.
Yeah, they would respond.
Take them out, put a gun to their head, and say, you Paddy Scum, we're going to shoot you here because you're an IRA guy. And if they say, no, I'm with you lads, then they get shot. So, I mean, you imagine yourself in that situation, you don't know what to do, right? That is a pretty hard security test to fail. But by contrast, Al-Qaeda security, even going back to Imad Salem, the Egyptian guy who infiltrated the cell in 1993 that ultimately bombed the World Trade Center, his wife answered the phone one day to the wrong phone, his pre-Al-Qaeda, would become Al-Qaeda, his buddies called him on, and just said, oh, Emad's out with his FBI friends at the moment, he'll get back to you. and he got away with that, right? He went down and he managed to BS his way out of that. And they said, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite stories about that was all these years, you know, the CIA was like, oh, we couldn't get people in Al-Qaeda. It was too hard to get operatives in Al-Qaeda. You know, we always think that this is maybe why, you know, Al-Hazmi and Al-Madar were getting protected, is because they were trying to flip guys so they could finally get sources in Al-Qaeda. Meanwhile, Johnny Walker Lynn, the American who, you know, ends up going to America and wanders into a training camp to join the Taliban because he thought it was based because he spent too much time online. Yeah. You know, he shows up at one of these Afghan training camps. He knows about 9/11 within, a week and a half? Like, yep. This information was not difficult to come by. Like, a lot of the reason why CIA didn't have people over there is because no one wanted to live in a cave. They all wanted those cushy diplomatic jobs and didn't want to have to rough it and pretend like they were in Al-Qaeda.
I think this is the question that I've never got a satisfactory answer to. Like, I was involved in the initial interview with Mark Rossini with Adam. We didn't put that one out, but this is what I asked was, well, Mark would say it's much more difficult to infiltrate Al Qaeda than it is the IRA, say. But if you look at comparisons, it doesn't seem to be. And if you read books by the Danish guy Morten Storm, who infiltrated, or Eamon Dean, the British guy, then there may be falsifications in those biographies. But essentially, they're walking in, and within a week, they're meeting all the top men and Osama bin Laden and all sorts. And
they're getting face-to-face meetings with bin Laden, these low-level guys. There was and I'm blanking out his name, but there was that guy that you had interviewed that wrote the book about the hijackers, who said the same thing, that there was no vetting process a lot of times.
Terry McDermott.
It's why Terry McDermott, thank you. That's why Ziad Jarrah, and how the fact that like every other person in his extended family has some kind of a tie to Mossad, like didn't seem to bother Al Qaeda too much, besides for the fact that they would always keep him so isolated from the rest of the folks.
Right. And you see kind of echoes of that. I was actually just listening to your and Adam's episode on Zacarias Moussaoui recently. And at one point you bring up the story in Crossing the Rubicon, actually, about how Michael Rupert describes the process through which FBI could get a warrant. Obviously in comparison to the FISA warrant that Harry Samet was unable to obtain, and how you say that there are FBI higher-ups who will claim, getting a warrant is a nightmare, absolute nightmare of a bureaucratic process, and then Michael Rupert says, no way. The FBI, they're just a bunch of cowboys. They can do whatever they want. And these sort of conflicting stories are all over, and you have this a complete lack of as Ben said, security throughout Al Qaeda, and how there are definitely just white dudes who spent way too much time in chat rooms in the 90s who flew to Afghanistan and walked into a camp and were having sit downs with bin Laden and hearing about plans for 9/11 within like 10 days. And then couple that with Cofer Black and people like George Tenet at CIA saying, we couldn't infiltrate Al Qaeda. Like it's impossible. No one can get over there. And then Director Mueller of the FBI saying that we had no prior knowledge because they were pristine in their tradecraft. They made no mistakes.
Exactly.
It's like, brother, what are you talking about? 3 of them got pulled over with warrants out for their arrests. Like, at some point, I think this is where you can start to see like the official narrative really has a lot of faults in it, and picking at those faults and trying to see how many times does something like that happen? How many times were a hijacker pulled over for a speeding ticket and they had a warrant out for their arrest in another state and nothing happened to them? Why did that happen multiple times? Compare that to Tim McVeigh, who got pulled over for not having a license plate, and all of a sudden within 12 hours he was fingered for the lone bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah building in 1995.
He was speeding with no plates away from the explosion of the Murrah Federal Building too.
Okay, to be sure, that's fair. But still, it just seems like there's so many inconsistencies, and they don't match the official narrative, and picking at that is always very interesting to me, I guess.
And that's why, and I'm sure you've heard Adam like go off about this a million times, but that's why to us like the official narrative matters so much, and why we spend so much time talking and going through like all of the official narrative, because it's very easy, and I think this is like the most seductive. I don't consider myself a conspiracy guy. I'm always consider myself a history guy first. And like I think part of the reason why is because it's so seductive to get sucked into that kind of conspiracy culture where every single major historical event has like these crazy alternate explanations, and like everything basically just becomes telling stories back and forth, but you don't really have like, it's the difference between knowing things and believing things.
Right.
And like if you just spend any amount of time going through like the official story, like all of the lies and cover-ups like tend to make they're so self-evident a lot of the time that like you don't need to entertain yourself with the more spectacular stuff, because there's already so much there to begin with.
Right.
I mean, like we talked earlier about the episode that we did on the insider trading and the financial crimes, and that's all stuff that is not disputed in the slightest. It just wasn't considered relevant to the overall investigation. There were no links to Al Qaeda, but you start going down that rabbit hole, and it's not just a couple puts on some airlines a few weeks before. Like there's stuff around reinsurance companies, there's stuff around travel, there's stuff around cruise companies. There's all these different webs that you can follow from there, and it's the same with the intelligence. It's the same with like even if you want to follow the official story, well, like I was talking about earlier, then you have to really understand like the 93 Trade Center bombing, and you have to understand like all of Al Qaeda throughout the 90s, because and it's a very materialist way of looking at things, but we're a materialist show. 9/11 and all the things before and after don't happen in a vacuum. It's all part of a much larger, much more complicated story.
Yeah.
And the official story is it was an unknown known. We had a failure of imagination. There was no way that we could have ever seen something like this coming. And you spend 2 seconds even going through the official story, that's a lie. Like, yeah. Come on.
I mean, footnote 44 is right there, people.
You can read the 28 pages. I mean, they're redacted, but they're not hard to read through those redactions.
No.
No, absolutely. And I do think that's, for me, the 93 bombing was probably the most revealing thing I ever learned about 9/11, because you can see it all there, how they're bringing in the blind sheikh, Omar Abdul Rahman, and he's receiving protection from the CIA, perhaps for numerous reasons, to remain in New York. And you can see with the assassination of Maya Kahani how it's covered up to protect these guys. And it's all, it's really like a little microcosm for 9/11 itself.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, that's where you can start to make yourself insane, too. You read more and more about it. It's like, wait a second. Ali Muhammad trained at Fort
Oh no! Not the Ali Muhammad stuff, please. My psyche can't handle that.
Wait, they had manuals from Fort Bragg? What?
Quadruple agent? Like what?
Yeah, there's so many layers to Ali Muhammad, and that's not even to get into like the stuff further back in the 70s with Abu Nidal and what the author Patrick Seal had to write about him. That basically there were a bunch of PLA guys who thought that he was almost certainly a Mossad agent because it's the only way that they could explain his behavior.
Right.
This is the problem we have with this stuff is we always try to pick a start date and then it always winds up getting pushed back another decade because you can't explain this unless you understand Egypt from the 1960s on, but that doesn't even help if you don't know for Saudi Arabia from the 1930s.
Yeah, well, that's what I liked about that's what I liked about David Icke. He starts all his books at the creation of the universe and then moves on from there, so you can go very comprehensive. You go for Atlantis and Lemuria and right for brilliant.
Exactly. You have to. Unless you're going to talk about Said Qutb listening to Baby It's Cold Outside in the 50s, then I don't want to hear what you have to say about 9/11.
The thing is, if you watch Said Qutb in those old videos, the way his eyes blink, it does seem like he might have that kind of reptile thing going on with the... see, I don't know enough
That's
about
a good point. That's a very good point. Thank you for bringing
See, no one is talking about this.
No one's talking about how Said Qutb was definitely a lizard person.
Okay, there's your Halloween special.
See, Richard, we came on and we cracked.
Yes, I'm so I'm so sorry, Richard.
And okay, so podcast for the New American Century, project for the New American Century. What are your thoughts on that document and how the New American Century has played out as we've gone through the wars and into the COVID era?
Well, as an American, Richard, I would say great. Living here has never been better. I have zero complaints. The good guys won.
No. I mean, it does kind of get at the crux of what we talk about so much. Everything in that document, maybe not everything, but basically everything that they wanted happened. Like 9/11 was the best day of these guys' lives. If you think about it, that's a very, I suppose, gross way of looking at it, but it's true to an effect. Like 9/11 was the best day of Dick Cheney's life. It was the best day of Donald Rumsfeld's life. It was the best day of Richard Pearl's life. It meant that they got everything they wanted. So at the end of the day, whether or not they did it, does it matter so much because they were celebrating deep down inside.
I have to do like a lot of first and second dates, unfortunately, where like it comes up that I do a podcast and then people get excited because they think I do like a My Favorite Murder kind of thing. And then I have to inevitably respond by being, no, it's a show about 9/11. But like when I have to like try to explain to people why this means so, like why I care so much about this stuff in the first place, the reality is for Eric and I as Americans, the state of emergency that was declared on September 14th after 9/11 had happened, that has been reauthorized by every president since W. Bush. Obama reauthorized it. Trump, now Biden. We still live under the Patriot Act. All of our, rights have been basically temporarily suspended. There's a direct line.
21 years.
Yeah, I mean, there's a direct line from, protesters in Portland being black-bagged and dragged off in SUVs a few years back during the George Floyd protests. And the law of the land in the Patriot Act.
Right.
All stuff, by the way, that was written out in secret, after continuity of government gets triggered by basically an all Republican shadow government in a underground military base out in, what was it, Virginia or Maryland? We're going to do continuity of government one day, and that's its own incredible rabbit hole to fall down.
Yeah. I think it predominantly took place in it was Site R, wasn't it? Which is in Maryland.
And then news of that only ended up leaking because some top-level Democrat complained to the media directly that the shadow government that was formed was all Republican.
Yeah, exactly. Which says a lot that he was only complaining that he wasn't included.
Yeah, it's not just there you go, American politics in one sentence. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I'm with regard to looking at the underpinning of this. I'm doing a series on my podcast at the minute called "The Energy of Empire," and energy is, in a sense, it's a cop-out word because it's a way of saying I don't really know what's driving empire, but you see this imperial energy rise up, and you can go as far back as you want. I try and jump in at the 1890s because it's when the US expands overseas, but you see, you see like a wave, it's like a wave. The material water isn't moving, but there's an energy moving through it, and that's what I think you see with PNAC and all the rest of it. There's some kind of imperial consciousness underpinning this that picks up different actors along the way. So it'll pick up Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld at one moment, and it'll pick up Joe Biden for a different kind of crisis 20 years later. But the empire is the thing that marches on. The 9/11 was a great gift to empire, as was COVID, and in different forms, in different ways, of different propaganda covering it. But the new American century, which will probably stop being an American century at some point, it will probably be whatever's coming after that, whether it is some more kind of globalized institutions when the US dollar collapses, as well. Presuming this is all going to happen, it'll take some other form, and just as individual actors are jettisoned, whole nation states get jettisoned at some point. You have a transition between Britain and the United States, and it'll become something else. But this is the underpinning thing that's rolling on through.
If the CCP want to pay us to start podcast for the new Chinese century, I will start taking Mandarin lessons today. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, absolutely. It's maybe $20K a month, maybe. That's all. That's not so much. They can afford it.
and pay for my Duolingo.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They can cancel the rest of my student debt, and we'll be good to go.
But to answer your question, Richard, I think the podcast that Eric and I first kind of met because we were both fans of is Death is Just Around the Corner, Michael S. Judge's very excellent podcast about American derangement. And on that show, he's very fond of talking about a kind of historical theory of his that he refers to as the Fourth Reich. This idea that as World War II was going on, you had direct American collaboration, like with the Nazis. We have Operation Paperclip after the war ends. Not only that, though, but you have all the deals that get struck with the real kind of villains of history, your Reinhard Gehlens and your Otto Skorzenys. And, you end up setting up after the war ends, this kind of anti-communist network that goes throughout the world. In his eyes, World War III is 1945 to 1991, where you have this battle between communism and anti-communism basically everywhere besides the United States and Russia. And what that usually ends with in a lot of those countries is tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not, in cases like Indonesia, millions of people, being wiped out either through war or through genocide or this, that, and the other thing. But I think what's at the heart of that, I can't speak for Eric here, but at least in my opinion, I think the real heart of that at the end of the day is capitalism. Like, I think that, with what you see in that kind of fascist movement is this idea of basically privatizing the entire state, kind of taking over financial control of everything, using that to loot it for the elite, and then trampling on everyone else just to satisfy the bloodlust that gets created and whipping up that kind of especially fervent nationalism. After the war ends, you see that all of this comes back to the United States and, all of the horror that we love getting into from, the 40s onwards. And I think we're kind of in the death throes now of that empire. I don't know how it's going to go from here. I'm not optimistic, that's for sure. But I think at this point, resources keep dwindling, and it's more and more, these competing nation states that are trying to get on top of the pile while they're getting still good.
Yeah, exactly. I would definitely agree with that. I think Ben and I both, I would say, boil it down to that issue of it is the the expansion of empire comes down to the necessity of the expansion of capitalism. At its core, capitalism is constantly expanding, and in order to do that, you have to constantly be at war. You have to constantly be at proxy war. And Richard, you said that like maybe in the future it won't be America. It will collapse. I think that will only happen at the expense of the deaths of every single proxy country that we fight Russia or China through. America will only collapse whenever Ukrainian is dead. America will only collapse when every third world civilian is dead in service to American empire and in service to American corporate interests. Fighting
Russia to the last Ukrainian will start fighting China to the last Taiwanese person.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, thanks for that dark vision. Yeah, no, I think you're correct. It's I mean, you can see it with the famine situations that have been present over the past couple of years. We're going to lock down in these countries and in Western countries and afford to do that and dump a lot of food and all the rest. But the immediate result of that is starvation in Africa and India, and no one cared about that. No, that was never part of it at all. It's going to be far worse, I would suggest, in the coming future. And again,
I mean, even right now, how many civilians have died in Tigray and how many civilians have died in Ukraine, and we only care about one. I think it's been like a few, almost 500,000 civilians have died throughout Ethiopia, and 2,000 civilians have died in Ukraine, and we only care about the white ones, you know.
To his credit, Brandon's also cut down the airstrikes that have been happening in Yemen, but like, we are still backing a Saudi genocide against the Houthis in Yemen. And we haven't brought up Israel a whole lot, but we still are more than happy to sit by and fund and support what's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's your feel from walking around where you live in the United States? You know, you're going on dates and the podcast comes up or anywhere else, to the level of political consciousness that's out there? Because I think certainly sitting on the other side of the pond, we get a very depressing image of this. And I did find the COVID situation depressing in that after spending, over a decade looking at these geopolitical issues and 9/11 and being very cynical of the state, I recognized that I was in a total bubble. Because I think we always like to imagine that people around us might have some of this kind of going on. Yeah.
Feel the same
and then
way.
Found everyone is cheering on the stage in every measure, completely uncynically, without a thought, without a care in the world, just lock down, take the vaccine, and that's all great. And so, but I think we have emerged out of that with more cynicism, more people being cynical of the state. But it feels, I think a few years ago, I perceived that I was part of a revolutionary movement where, particularly with streaming video, because it was very hard to learn about stuff prior to being able to download audio and video from the internet, because you're reading articles or whatever. And of course, like reading a book is probably the best way to get information. But to get just into the ballpark, a documentary or something is very helpful. And you can obviously consume a lot of information from them. So when streaming video...
Our show wouldn't exist without audio.
So when it came online, I was thinking, like, my God, if this was around when I was like 18 and 9/11 happened, that would have been a revolution, because all the kids are going to be sat at school, like watching documentaries, and even if it's Alex Jones or whatever, they'll be getting in the ballpark, and then they're going to have questions that just won't go away. And that didn't happen at all. It's like there was reason for that optimism, but it seemed to peak at some point. It's like, this is going to be interesting to 10 to 15% of the population. Maybe I'm being optimistic there. And that's it. That is, you are maxed out, and the rest of them are just plugged into the red team or the blue team. So but am I being pessimistic? What's your feel from your interactions in life?
I would say maybe I don't get out as much as Ben does. I'm married and tend to just sort of sit in my backyard. But I do think that there is a growing sense of cynicism amongst more, you could call them normie friends or people that I interact with.
You can certainly reach people, I think, with the kind of stuff we talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, shockingly, more people are willing to listen to what I have to say. I think maybe 5 years ago, if I had said I was doing a 9/11 podcast, I think I would have gotten a lot more pushback or a lot more odd looks from friends and work colleagues. But now I feel that I get a lot of like, oh wow, cool, what do you have to say?
Right.
There is a little bit more of that, for sure. Along with that, I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because I think you have a lot of people that are cynical, have a lot of political energy, but are naive and misplace it, I guess you could say. I think a healthy amount of skepticism is good, but I think that it's starting to get to the point where, at least in my own view, I think people might be so willing to or wanting to accept any kind of cynical viewpoint that they're led astray by a lot of different places, and it's no fault of their own, but I see a lot of for the lack of a better term, just very dumb takes on things that aren't well thought out. And maybe it's just me being frustrated because I've spent so much time thinking and reading that I'm like, wow, maybe people shouldn't have access to this at all because it's just making them dumber. But obviously, I don't actually think that. But yeah, it's just a double-edged sword, I think. I think it's generally good that people are more skeptical, and I do see more of that. But you see a lot of people who are very easily controlled in another way because they're just falling for anything. So it's a very fine balance, and most people that I know, while they're willing to hear different arguments, aren't willing to spend a lot of time actually truly critically thinking about it and coming to terms with whatever they might find out from hearing something on a podcast or reading something that's essentially communicated through a meme that they've read on the internet that they've decided is now their entire basis for their political ideology. They don't want to or have the time to or even care about thinking about what that actually means and turning that energy into something that could be politically useful.
Americans, in my own personal experience too, and I'm painting with very broad brushes, just don't care about history either. Like
Not
the
at
memory,
all. Not at
the
all.
memory is goldfish length in this country. Bless my mother's heart, but she is like a very MSNBC liberal type who loves the and hates Trump, which is good. I mean, that's definitely the better side to be on than like my stark raving insane Fox News dad sometimes. But like she's all about the January 6th stuff, and like every time I have dinner with her or I'm over visiting for one reason or another, like that's all she can breathlessly talk about is the insurrection and all of this January 6th stuff because they tried to steal the election. And occasionally, like when I'm having a worse day, I will sometimes find myself asking, well, they did steal the election in 2000 and you didn't really seem to care about it then or still care about it now.
Yeah, you know what, guys, I'm missing those stark raving mad fox type Republicans. We don't see so much of them anymore. I want to go back to the time when Keith Olbermann was the good guy. I'm missing those days.
Yeah.
Bill O'Reilly needs to be let back on television so this nation can all come together and just hate him again.
Yeah. Yeah, living in Texas, it does get a little crazy. You drive on a lot of highways here, and you see a lot of people that just openly have firearms on display in their MAGA trucks, and it can be a little intimidating after a while.
Yeah, and that energy could come back in a big way.
You can reach those people too because they all hate the government.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think you're putting your finger on a genuinely difficult problem in that we all want more people to get involved in these kind of ideas, but when they do, we're not necessarily happy with the way they do. And what are we asking of people? Because you're asking people, there's an entire IQ spectrum in society. There's an entire spectrum of how much time people can put into things. And so you're asking people on all different places in that spectrum to jump into what is very difficult information. And yet what you see, a lot of them, will go down the road of the flat earth movement. Or, I mean, I recall when there was the financial crisis in 2008, and I'll just to put my cards on the table, I'm quite sort of anarcho-capitalist libertarian type. And I was looking at the growth of that movement at the time, thinking, oh, this is great. More people are Googling Mises than ever. More people are Googling about what the Federal Reserve does. This is like and then I looked at the growth at the far right. And it was just, I've been looking at an anthill, right, compared to this towering skyscraper that had taken over like parts of Europe with that kind of swing. So that's kind of where people go. And I don't think that's going to change massively. I think, not in our lifetime. We're going to sort of see and live alongside and try and interact with that in some way. But I think it's a genuine problem that is not easy to solve.
I think a lot about if like the U.S. government, a year from now, like maybe next November or so, decides that they're finally just going to give it up and just like put all the JFK stuff out and are just like, you know what, it was our bad. Sorry. Maybe we can all move on now. And like I think about how long that would last in like the mainstream American news cycle, and like Eric, what do you think? 2 days before that's out for
maybe, especially if it was JFK stuff. Yeah, maybe. If the over-under were 2 days, I guess I might take the over, but it's under
Even to
a
go
week.
back to the 9/11 stuff, I mean, Brandon put out the documents, earlier on this year, basically fingering Omar al-Bayoumi as being a Saudi spy. And I know you guys have talked about this on Dark and Hour a lot. We've talked about this. It's the heart of our show, why we started doing it. This whole idea that the guy who's basically acting as the handler for Al-Hazmi and Al-Madar once they moved to America and are living in San Diego is this guy who clearly is working for Saudi intelligence. And like we get solid proof from the FBI. I mean, it's still redacted, but like it's all there. That gets made public. You get like one story like in the mainstream news. It's out of the news cycle. It doesn't even last a single day in the news cycle, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you can reach people with this stuff, and like on an individual basis, you can get people interested. But in terms of like, I don't think we're going to change anything with this show, to be honest with you, besides getting a few more people like maybe interested in the overall topic.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't necessarily think that like you can change people's mind on a mass level by just showing them the truth, because I think for a lot of people, they either just don't care, or a lot of people just get uncomfortable too. They just don't like having their preconceived notions change, because then they feel like they've been a sucker the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they would rather just feel like they're right and not engage with it, as opposed to having to run the risk that, like I went through, that a lot of what you took for granted as being the truth was really more of a lie.
It's actually the central premise of Colonel Edwin House, Woodrow Wilson's kind of confidant advisor, his book Philip Drew Administrator, is that a Washington politician gets caught on a recording device just being openly corrupt, and this is played to the nation then, and there's a revolution where hundreds of thousands of people march on Washington. And I always used to think after I read, well, what would happen if that actually became a thing? And my answer is nothing. Nothing would happen at all. It's because it did happen.
The Panama and Paradise Papers were a great example of that, where we found out that everyone from like Ronaldo to like every president to that they all like hoard money, cheat taxes, keep things in like off-shell fake bank accounts, and they blew that one lady up in the Maltese island or the Maldives, and like that was the extent of it.
Yeah, or Hunter Biden's laptop story just went no, it got squashed. It just.
Exactly. I mean, we just see his dick every week, which is funny, but like beyond that,
how many Skittles can he fit on there? No, I mean, I think the only place in which you see that kind of organization and energy might be South Korea. That's like the last time when I saw, millions of people marching in protest back in 2016 or 17. When their president at the time was found to have links to, or basically allowing their administration to be controlled by the Moonies.
Which is such a crazy story, by the way.
Yeah, insane. And I'm not very well educated on the story. I haven't read a lot about it.
It's now led to the most successful political assassination possibly ever.
Which is insane,
done by
because now you see what's the percentage of the population of Japan that now basically says like, oh, that was probably a net good, actually.
like over half of them at this point. Like that dude won.
He did. Yeah, he did. And you do have to ask the question whether he won because there was political corruption or whether he won because he was associating with Koreans.
But they were all just really impressed by his Fallout 4 looking pipe gun.
Yeah.
I just respect the craftsmanship.
Yeah, exactly. That's in true Japanese fashion, I think. But that kind of political organization, it's impossible to imagine it happening in America. It's impossible.
Even with after Trump was to happen, like that was where like most people probably in our lifetime so far got radicalized like into being more politically active, and really all that ended up leading to is like, I don't know,
the Women's March,
more DSA membership, more sex pests to get kicked out of the DSA 6 months after joining, along with like all of the cops. I mean,
right. Which, not to like continue to feel like it's to, believers in the immortal science against an anarcho-capitalist, but I do think that a lot of this might come back to, be it empire, be it capitalism, whatever you want to look at it as. Of course, I understand that there are nuances there, and there's differences in how you want to interpret different things, if you want to call it crony capitalism, whatever. But It does seem like it's all kind of priced in. Look at the women's marches in 2016, 17. Like what happened? It's nothing more than just narcissistic ego stroking at the end of the day. There's no organization to try to change this because, I mean, I've spent a lot of time. I'm sure you know who Dave Smith is. Listening to his show probably in like 2018 because I had never really heard any arguments like that before, and so I spent a lot of time listening to his show and. Reading like Anatomy of the State and reading a lot of anarcho-capitalist libertarian literature because I was very interested in understanding that viewpoint because it was so far from what I had ever known to be a viewpoint. Growing up, my father worked for, he was a civil engineer working for the Department of Transportation. So obviously like neoliberal Democrats that just didn't ask questions. I had never really experienced any viewpoint like that. So I do understand that viewpoint and looking at empire from a libertarian sort of perspective. So whether or not it is just capitalism, regardless of what you want to call it, or if it is crony capitalism and empire, there is this inherent ability to absorb political energy. And if you're not going to rally around some kind of political organization, then what are you doing at the end of the day? If you're not actually trying to change policy and root out corruption and do something with the organized bodies under which you live, then what are you doing? You're just exercising your own ego and going home at the end of the day and watching TV.
You see, like, I mean, the George Floyd protests would be a great example of that, where like it did feel like for a week or so, like everything could potentially be in flux, you know. And I'll never forget watching the police station get burned down the first night, and then 2 weeks later, it's like, okay, what's next in the news cycle? Like, we're on to the next thing now.
Yeah, just nothing happens.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of that, you're right, Eric, is by design, though. Like, there are always those outlets to blow that steam off and then resume things back to the status quo. And you know, it's that idea of that, you know, and I think this is part of the reason why, like, everyone in America is so horny for a civil war to take place. Like, everyone deep down really wants a civil war because we finally feel like this would be the way to, you know, crack things up and finally be something different than what we have now. But, like, as we saw, like, COVID was supposed to be something like that. You know, it was supposed to be something like that when Russia invaded Ukraine earlier this year. But at the end of the day, like, capitalism is really good at maintaining that status quo because that's what Skynet needs. Like,
yeah, exactly. I mean, I would even push back against that and say that I don't even think this kind of horniness, as you say, for a civil war is really this idea that people expect there to be change. People don't want that. They don't care about change. I think that they want a civil war because they want to see their enemies suffer. And that's kind of the nexus of American politics is just how can I get one up on the person that I view as the problem here?
It's all we have left. No one has an idea to do anything different. It's just how do I punish those that I don't like?
Right. And then how can I buy, you know, a dumb shirt that signifies that that's what I believe?
Yeah, that level of entrenchment, that is quite striking. I'm not sure it's quite as bad in Britain. I don't walk the streets enough to really answer that question. I don't have my ear to the ground enough. But the level of being on a team and it's all like treating it like a game. Because when you're playing the game, that's fine. All that really matters is your side wins. Or you don't break the other team's legs or something. It's all good fun. But treating life like that is obviously a mistake. And that's...
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do think it's interesting, the idea that certain protest movements come about as a way for people to blow off steam. And are engineered in that way. So, like, I've seen these graphs of the mentions of racism or the mentions of sexism in the New York Times shooting up around the time of the financial crash, when there's this energy about what kind of system we're living in here. It seems like we're being taken for a ride by the bankers and the politicians. Let's go get them. Let's have an Occupy movement. Let's have a Tea Party movement. And then that is redirected inwards into black people are screwing white people, who are screwing black people, who are screwing men, who are screwing women, who are screwing the transgender crowd. Sure. And everyone gets fighting against everyone else. And well, that's probably not, whether it's designed or whatever, it seems to be a feature of the system. You know?
I think it is more a feature, as you say. I have a hard time necessarily believing that it is by design, because I don't know if it's as... Well, I don't know. What do you want to call design? Is it, pre-planned? Or is the New York Times telling us to think this? Or did they have a finger on the pulse and say, oh, we're probably going to make a lot of money if we print this and get a lot of interaction and a lot of traffic because we are taking advantage of the situation? And I think
because the whole thing works off outrage. All the money gets made off you being angry and clicking through to the next thing and getting angrier and staying on some kind of algorithm the whole time.
Right. Which is, I know that I think you guys just did on your show, you and Adam, just did, or on this show rather, just did at least 2 episodes on Alex Jones and his trial. But there's a lot of people love to say that Alex Jones is a CIA operative, and he is through some kind of monarch project influencing the culture and being the purposeful poison pill. And I think maybe to a degree has he been...
This is the Gramsci take, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Is he doing that, or is he somebody that's just actually smart enough to know that he can make a fuck ton of money if he just keeps changing what he says ever so slightly? Look back in the aughts. He wasn't talking like he was in 2012 about Sandy Hook. He was, talking about the Bush administration, and he was, maybe, I guess, conservative, but he was certainly anti-establishment, and then all of a sudden he's pro-Trump, and he's, only talking about pedophile. He's going where the money is.
You see it with conspiracy theory and also with libertarians sometimes. There's a shift to the right and a massive expansion in audience. Okay, so Alex Jones, yes, and Paul Joseph Watson, who was a conspiracy theorist, now doesn't want to know anything about conspiracy theories. It's all evil Muslims. And well, hang on, Paul, how do you reconcile that with your 9/11 documentaries and your 7/7 bombings? So, but how you reconcile it is there's a shit ton of money to be made talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So might as well get that Knights of Malta money.
I mean, we always say if they want to give us the Ben Shapiro money, like we'll pivot this podcast to be about how, I don't know, the DSA did 9/11 or something, or Intifada did 9/11. If
there's 2 different forces there.
Exactly. Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel, email us, please.
There are the forces from the ground up there of just, there's a lot of people who want right-wing reactionary talking points, and they'll sign up to your subscriptions and they'll buy your Mega Man vitamin tablets if you're putting that content out there. But I think there is a top-down element. Like Sybil Edmonds, she did a presentation on this years ago. I don't think it's even available online anymore, where she talks about after being an FBI whistleblower, she went to set up her media organization, and she went to a meeting with angel investors. I'm pretty sure it was Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! That took her to the meeting. She talked about how these ladies, like Californian ladies in rainbow-colored skirts and sandals, talked about what great work she was doing and how they were looking to invest in media, and they were looking for the right group, and what they thought the right group was kind of what Sybil was doing, but maybe not critical of the Democratic Party right now. But just, and
sure.
Sybil looked at this, well, they're offering this money and I'll get hooked in, right? Because then I'll start employing staff, I'll have all these overheads of the studio, I'll have rent to pay, and I will be on the teat and I'll never get off it. And if they say don't run a story, it's not that anyone is telling anyone what to do. They're just saying, well, this is how I want to spend my money. Are you the person who's in line of that? So, and I think that's the kind of top-down element of this control. Now, who those people are and what their agenda is, and whether they're MK Ultra or slaves, well, that's a deeper question. But I think the philosophical question almost I brought up against this. I'm actually doing a series at the minute called Reading David Icke, which for my sins, right, where I'm going through his books and trying to explain how a BBC sports commentator in the 1980s became the conspiracy theorist we all know and more with his shape-shifting reptiles. And a big part of that is MK Ultra and people like Kathy O'Brien, kind of extreme end of I went into hypnosis in my 30s and I recovered all these memories of being sexually abused by George Bush and Bill Clinton end. And Ike meets so many of these people, he finds it overwhelming and says, okay, this must be true then. And one of the questions I bring up for me is, to what extent can deception exist without actually collapsing in itself? Okay, because if you had groups of people who were directly controlling the media, say in a very overt fashion, like it's not a structure, it's not this is the way the system is kind of geared, it's that people are presenting a completely different face to the public than they are in their private lives. Well, if you're going to Bohemian Grove and engaging in human sacrifice or something, well, you have to have waiters and waitresses there who presumably aren't part of the elite, okay? And they can go home and talk about this. You've got to find a way. So if there's a lot of deception there has to be a point where you're interacting with someone who isn't in the inside circle, and then you've got to maintain it all the time. So I think a system like that must kind of collapse at some point, and therefore, of course, there's deception. Of course, I think the Clintons and the Bushes are basically crime families, like mafioso types. But I would think there must be a limit to that too. In like, I don't think George is shape-shifting into a reptile. Or to be more mundane about it, I don't think that he's going behind doors of Bill Clinton and talking about how they're going to introduce the New World Order through swapping the presidency back and forth between the families. I would guess, right, that because I just think there's a limit to deception before it topples over.
Yeah, exactly. I think
and I always tell people, like, when 9/11 comes up, that like my personal, like, while I said earlier I don't have a unified theory, like one thing that I do know for sure is that there was not like a smoky, back room in the White House where like the Bush cabinet sat down and were like, okay, on September 11th, here's the plan. We're going to be ready with this, this, and this. Like Eric said earlier, I think a lot of it exists in more of a gray area. Like with JFK, you're never going to find some document in some archive somewhere where like a bunch of people signed their names being like, okay, we agree killing JFK is the right call. A lot of this stuff, these people are smart enough to know to not put this stuff in writing. They're not stupid. They don't want to get caught. And a lot of times the most you have to go with is innuendo and, reading between the lines with this kind of stuff. And that's why like a lot of people kind of like bristle at the idea of, even calling themselves conspiracy people or conspiracy theorists or what have you. Like I said earlier, I'm not a huge fan of it myself, but like when it comes to how, like, especially the like ruling elite handle things, like it is conspiracy at the end of the day. Like a lot of it is handled in ways that are intentionally intentionally made difficult to what's the word I'm looking for here? They make it intentionally difficult to follow the tracks and connect those dots and as cover. But
I mean, that's not even anything new. Like Adam Smith talks about that in The Wealth of Nations. I don't remember the exact quote off the top of my head, but it's something to the effect of all traders will sit down in a tavern and discuss how they can better extract profits from their workers. I think that Adam Smith personally doesn't make the best jumping off arguments after that or the best solutions to counter that, but that's not a disputed opinion. That is what he's saying, and then later he jumps off of that fact to form his own opinions about the formation of capitalism in America at that time, and as that pertains to the formulation of government in America at that time. But yeah, it's absolutely undisputed. I think to some degree, it probably doesn't happen like the Saturday Night Live skit from the 80s where Reagan is taking pictures with the Girl Scouts and all like lovely, oh, I don't know where I am. And then he brings all the gentlemen back in and he replaces the painting on the wall, and it's a world map. And he's saying the red places are where we ship arms and the green places are where we smuggle drugs. And I don't think it's quite like that, but I do think it's certainly a lot of people who are willing to not ask questions because it's better for their own lives and for the positions that they have professionally. And B, it's a lot of people that wouldn't be in the position they are if they were somebody who would inherently want to question that. I think even Dave Smith has talked about this on his podcast before, that you see that a lot in corporate media. The people who write for corporate media, I don't think that they're necessarily working in some grand conspiracy. I just think that they're the type of people who would never get those jobs if they weren't willing to do that. Yeah.
I think Chomsky said that. It might have been to a BBC journalist saying that.
Absolutely.
He said, no one's ever told me to not say anything. And so, well, respectfully, if you were the kind of person that needed to be told that, you wouldn't be here.
Exactly.
And if anything, I think from what we call Mockingbird, that's a bit of a loose term there was definitely a period in history where a lot of brown envelopes were going from the CIA to the media organizations, or there was just an understanding between the editor of the New York Times and Alan Dulles that they are definitely batting for the same team. And if Alan gives a phone call, he just wants something going in, it doesn't go in. And I'm not sure, maybe we've gone back to that a bit with the support the media gave to the Democratic Party to get Trump out. Maybe we saw more of a kind of ideological realignment. And maybe we saw it a bit with the war on terror. But I would say now it's gone to a place that's more sophisticated from then, whether it's not that they feel they're on the same team. It's just that the media is full of people who would never think to question, who would never think to go to those places.
I always think about ABC News and how, I believe this was like the late 80s, they ran a lot of pieces that were very critical of like the Bush administration and the CIA. And William Casey, the famous story with Cap Cities, how William Casey got involved, helped basically buy up ABC News after driving the stock price down by smearing them in the media. And then as soon as they basically took control, they got them to stop reporting on all that covert stuff and basically doing all these retractions. Like, at the end of the day, capitalism, again, has a way to win for all that kind of stuff, because like all the people that have something to lose by this stuff coming out also have more than enough money to make it go away.
Yeah.
See every whistleblower book every single copy gets bought up by the Department of Defense and just sits in a closet in the Pentagon somewhere because the truth is too raw.
Yeah, Tony Schaefer's, for example, I believe the first edition of his book was almost completely bought out by the DOD and burned.
We talked about Robert Baer on the Syriana episode, and he ended up having an entire chapter cut out by the CIA before it could get published.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you certainly see it more overtly with popular media, I think, right? Like, no one is even trying to hide that the U.S. military told the producers what to put in Top Gun. Like, it was a blatant.
Oh, all the Marvel movies are. Yeah, I mean, all the Marvel movies are just commercials for Northrop Grumman and the DoD
and JSOC. Yeah,
yeah, and JSOC. I mean, we talk about that on Zero Dark 30. Yeah. A truly evil film,
right? And so,
how, like, the CIA literally wrote the script for that to the extent where like they got in trouble for basically like leaving Hollywood producers around classified material at Langley.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's not really hidden.
And why, by the way? Because they were all getting taken out on expensive dinners and being given like watches and expensive dresses in certain people's cases. Like, again, like all these movie producers are more than happy to wine and dine and pay these people, who, by the way, are technically employees of the government. And I mean, never overlooking a chance to make a profit for themselves. That's the CIA way, be it cocaine or movies.
Yeah, and Richard, you said that maybe it has gotten more sophisticated. Maybe that is the more sophisticated way of doing it, because generally, at least speaking for Americans, they will just watch Zero Dark 30 and decide, oh, well, based on real events is good enough for me. That's
all you need, based on true events.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to watch that movie and decide that this is the reality in
which I live.
Well, you
can see that the Looming Tower kind of was a Netflix series or whatever it was on.
A Hulu series,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's subtle, and the agency doesn't come out of it shining, but there are like subtle misrepresentations that give the CIA a kind of clean bill. I mean, just one example would be there's a composite character of Jen Matthews and Alfreda Bukowski and some of the women in Alex Station crying after the attacks happened, right? And what I think it's the Greek fella, John Kiriakou. I think he's the one that there were no tears shed in there. There was just complete self-righteousness that day of like, this wasn't our fault at all, right? It's interesting that, like, he commented on that, and then they portrayed it the different way. That's just one of many little subtle things that.
We'll have to have you on, Richard. We're going to do Looming Tower hopefully one day, the TV show. We'll try to get you the episodes. That is a fun show, to be honest with you.
So look, what's coming up? What's coming up in the immediate future on the?
It's going to be 9/11 again. Before you know it, comes every year.
Yeah, our decorations are up. We just we put out yesterday the first in at least 2 or 3 episodes that we'll do on Zacharias Moussaoui. We kind of talked about his early beginnings from a child growing up in France to basically up to the day of his arrest on August 16, 2001. And we plan to go beyond that and really go into Harry Sammett's story and what happened at the FBI Radical Fundamentalist Unit and Minneapolis FBI field offices. And from there, we have a couple projects that we're thinking about. We mentioned the S.K. Bain episode that we'd like to do around Halloween. I believe we are planning to collaborate with Adam Fitzgerald again for an episode that will release around 9/11. I don't know, Ben, if you want to tell what we're thinking of doing there. I think it'll be a good episode.
Yeah, we're planning on doing a tribute episode to John O'Neill, actually. Okay. Seeing as how it's a story that like I found completely unbelievable from reading Looming Tower, the book, and he's a guy that doesn't get enough credit. Every year, people should be talking about him, and that's one that is worth telling. And also, stay tuned because we want to get to Israel before the end of the year too. We're going to get the show immediately canceled because we're going to talk about the Shea memo.
Right. Yeah, probably will.
a month and a half, and then a bunch of pit crew avies on Twitter are going to get me fired from my job.
Just for the
we're gonna have a bunch of Indian dudes on Twitter just screaming at us.
Just for the listeners, John O'Neill was the head of the FBI's what's the I-49 squad? The terrorist strategy in the FBI, looking at Bin Laden, resigns, takes a job in the Twin Towers, and dies on 9/11. So that
became head of security at the World Trade Center on August 26th.
There you go. So incredible story. Incredible. Okay, gentlemen, let's get out of here. Thank you very much indeed. It's been
thank you so much for having us.
So
it was so much fun doing this.
Yeah, give me a shout. So great. Thank you.